New DJI gimbals. Which one of these should you buy? Which one of these will I buy? Today I'm taking a look at the DJI RS3 Mini versus the DJI RS3. So I guess we could start by just measuring the circumference of your carrying arm, because before we even put a camera on it, the RS3 is 50% heavier than the RS3 Mini. To put that into perspective, this gimbal with the ZV-E10 and a small lens on it is within an ounce of the weight of this gimbal empty. And actually, with these configurations you're seeing here, this gimbal, camera, and lens is lighter than just this camera and lens combo by itself. So when you venture into a world of carrying a bigger camera atop a bigger robot arm, you're gonna need the 3rd generation stabilization algorithm, because after a couple of hours of holding this thing, your arms are gonna be kind of shaky. That was my reality last week when I was at CES for like basically 3 consecutive 9-hour days holding this thing, because there's not really anywhere to put it down. After an event like that, you literally go home feeling like you just got back from the gym. Other things to consider between these two models: RavenEye. The RavenEye transmitter will not work with the RS3 Mini. There's nowhere to mount it, and there's no data port to plug it into. This does have the one RSS control camera port, but for the RavenEye, it needs one of those for the camera and one of those for the transmitter. So if active tracking is something you'd like to do or something you're excited about, you'll have to go with the bigger RS3. Active tracking is a pretty cool feature, but it does require the use of your phone to select the subject you want to track. I'm gonna record my screen so you can see what the RavenEye sees. So if this is something you're thinking about doing on the fly, let's say you're moving through a warehouse and you want to track this little black light. You can just drag a box around it. Now the RavenEye is going to look at that light, and no matter what I do with the actual gimbal, it's going to stay locked onto it. So this would work if you're in a crowd of people somewhere and you want to track an object, but you don't want to like step on a little kid. You can just hold your camera up in the air, lock it onto whatever the thing is, and you can just pay attention to where you're walking instead of where you're facing the camera, and it's going to stay locked onto that object. It works really well. It's actually super handy. But back to the weight for a second. Now you're strapping a phone to the side of your gimbal and an extra RavenEye module, which brings this entire configuration to 8.5 pounds. For me, the most useful use for RavenEye is on a tripod here at the warehouse. One moment. So I have my phone over here and I can see what the camera sees. Just put a little box around my own face. And that way I can have the camera track me as I move around the room. If I had like a DIY setup that had just more things involved and you needed to see me as I moved about my space. If I was doing some larger scale DIY something or other, it would be helpful to make it look like I have a cameraman and I can move throughout the warehouse. It's pretty neat. Also pretty niche. The Mini does have one of these mounts for a monitor or for a phone or whatever you would use it for. Battery life is a thing people are talking about, and the fact that you can swap out these battery handles with the RS3 but not the RS3 Mini. But in reality, I don't know who you are if you're shooting for more than 10 hours straight without a break with this thing. And also, both gimbals can charge while they're in use. So you can have like a little external battery like this or something, just be in your pocket with a cord sticking out of it, plug into the bottom of this. It doesn't really get in the way of anything, and you'll see in a second, it can charge while you're using it. So you can use this indefinitely. You can have a 20-hour battery life if your endurance is so crazy that you need more than 10 or 12. The RS3 Mini has a vertical mode. It doesn't just flip over, but swapping your camera from the bottom arm here to the side arm here doesn't really take that much time. And then you do have to give it a serious rebalance after that. Vertical mode. Certainly can't make the argument that vertical video isn't popular now, so I can see this as being a pretty cool feature. You can also do that if you have a cage in your camera, because any one of these little holes on my camera anywhere can have the plate mounted to it, so you can mount this camera whichever direction you want it to sit. So if you have your camera in a cage, you can do vertical mounting on either gimbal. This just has it integrated into one of the arms. I brought both these configurations out to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge at Disney World. I just figured walking around a dimly lit warehouse would have been ugly and boring for test footage. And I'm happy to report that the footage out of both of these gimbals is super smooth and they're really easy to control. It's not any more difficult to do like an orbit around pan shot with a tiny gimbal than it is with a big one. Any of the bouncing that you see in this footage is basically user error. I really just didn't want to do the gimbal duck walk that you have to do to get rid of the bounciness. Only the Ronin 4D can actually move the camera up and down to counteract that bounce. So instead, to get smooth footage, you have to kind of sneak walk. But it was already awkward enough being an adult alone at Disney World shooting footage of strangers with a giant robot arm. So you get some bounce. You get some bounce. What do you want? But aside from maybe you're able to pick out the difference in quality from these two cameras, the footage from either one was no more or less smooth. They were both smooth. Then when we get into 4K 120 plus gimbal smoothiness from the A7S III, oh man, someone call James Cameron, I'm ready for the big time. With the Sony A7S III or the Sony A7 IV, they're almost exactly the same size and like within 30 grams of the same weight. They're basically the same. Everyone's all pumped how you can use a 24-70 with this tiny gimbal, and you can. I have these small rig cages on my cameras so that you can connect an extra microphone and a monitor on top when you want to, not when it's on a gimbal. But I think the cage makes it sit up a little higher than it would otherwise, so it's a little top heavy with a big camera and a big lens on a tiny gimbal. but it works. The only time it doesn't work is, and this might be because the cage has it a little too top heavy, but with a heavy lens and a bigger camera, if you tilt down too far, it'll get to a certain point where it just quits on you and gives up, and then it won't recover. You have to like pull it back up. But other than that, this thing totally works as expected. It can do all the gimbally things you normally do with a gimbal. It's responsive, it's smooth, it doesn't shake, it doesn't jitter. It's actually really easy to use, and it's a lot lighter than this one. And there's even a screen on the back that you can enable that shows like how hard each individual motor is working. There we go. So you can see that during normal use, there's a little bar that pops up, turns orange if it's working too hard. But with normal gimbal movements, doing this little thing here, fine, it gets a little orange, but everything pretty much stays where you would expect. So it's only when you tilt too far. If I tilt down, 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 you see it getting orange, see it getting red, it's pissed. The only other thing that seems to make this gimbal struggle, if you try to zoom out a lens, so that, because you've balanced it one way, and the further you zoom out the lens, the more that bar is going to turn red. It's kind of pissed off. Can it handle the whole thing? Yeah, it can handle the whole zoom range of that lens. It's not happy about it, but it is yeah, can give up. What you can do is you can balance the lens at like 40 millimeters, so it only has to work a little extra hard to go out to 70 or into 24. Or you can buy the bigger gimbal, which has the stronger motors. It doesn't care at all if you zoom out to 70 and you still want to just work it however you want, or you zoom all the way into 24. This gimbal's motors are extra strong. Heavy lens combo, RS3. This camera with this lens is 3 pounds and 15 ounces, which is just about a half a pound shy of this gimbal's stated maximum weight. So as long as you have it balanced, it's gonna work. So we've got the RavenEye as a deal breaker. We've got big camera, big lens if you wanna be able to zoom the lens while you're mounted to the Mini as a deal breaker. Both cameras have a really similar interface. It's a touch screen on the back where you can balance your gimbal, do your calibration, set the speed of responsiveness, switch between the different modes. Both models have no problem just flipping down so you can shoot something really low as you're moving. Both models can connect through Bluetooth, so you can use this little record button on the gimbal to start and stop your camera, which is handy. An interesting trick that I saw Jason Lee do with this button is through button remapping on the camera software. So basically you have one button that will just do whatever the corresponding button, the record button on the camera will do. But you can remap this button to do whatever you want. But what he was doing was panning sideways and following a person, but then there's gonna be like things shooting in front of the camera. And he remapped this red button so that it was manual focus, autofocus. And I did the same thing shooting this boat across the pond at Disney, had it in autofocus so it got the focus on the boat. Then I would push the button and switch it to manual focus as I see like a tree or a person or a thing that's gonna cross the plane of the camera so the autofocus doesn't catch that thing. It's just a neat little trick to make use of this Bluetooth button. So, you've got a choice to make. Let me put these back where they started. If you're shooting with a small camera like the ZV-E10 and you're not interested in RavenEye or with this really cool auto locking feature that this one does, and you're good at balancing and you don't feel like you need the extra convenience of this fine-tuning balancing wheel, then I think it's an obvious choice to get the Mini. Even if you are using the A7S III and you just need stabilization without all the extra features, and especially if the 24-70 is your heaviest lens, then get the Mini. It's a great travel gimbal. This auto locking is a cool feature, but honestly, I only lock the gimbal when I'm done using it, or like if we're gonna drive somewhere between shots and you need to pack it up, but that doesn't happen so often that it's gonna save you more than a few seconds of time. It is really neat though. All right, that brings me to one more point about the RS3 Mini. When you turn it off and you're gonna lock it up, if you're leaving the camera mounted to it, this is the shape that it'll be in its locked state. It doesn't fold all the way up like this one does, where the arms like lay within each other. In order to make this balance, they changed the configuration of these arms, and this one knocks against the thing. You'd have to slide that forward, and then you've lost your balancing. So when you're gonna pack it up for the day, no problem. You just loosen this up, pull this up, and then it can lock like that. But if you're still in the middle of your shooting, then it's gonna be locked right here. That said, even though it is that shape, this is the bag I pretty much always have with me, just for extra lenses or batteries or whatever. I can lock it up like this, and it still will just dive right into this bag, and if you take off the little legs, it's gone. Super easy, super quick, and it's so light that I could carry this around all day, no problem, with the gimbal in there. The RS3 is pretty giant, but because they made it so that the handle comes off, and then the tripod comes off the handle, it can also pack down to the size of a bag that you can just carry away with you. Though, now this bag is what did I say, like 6 pounds heavier. So this works too. It'll just make my shoulder a little sore. If you're gonna be shooting with big lenses, or if you love RavenEye, or if you're just so strong that the extra weight doesn't matter at all, it's less than $200 more. The battery lasts a little bit longer. It can take a little more abuse if you're doing something wacky like running full speed, chasing after people if you're making movies. Or if you're gonna like attach it to a moving car, you're gonna want the stronger motors. Then get the RS3. RavenEye does it for me. I'm going with the RS3.